So before I go any further, I want to say thank you to one of our sponsors, Hammer Co. LLP, for sponsoring this evening's keynote presentation. Hammer Co. has been helping people overcome legal challenges for 2 decades. Wherever you are in BC, they provide one-to-one support from an experienced lawyer who is specifically equipped to handle your type of case. So thank you, Hammer Co., for your support. So if I'm opening this meeting, I want to let you in on a little secret. Here at Spinal Cord Injury BC, the events that I'm most involved in are ones related to education or informational content. If you missed my blurb earlier on, I'm Jocelyn Maffin. I'm manager of our information resources at Spinal Cord Injury BC. You might be familiar with some of these informational sessions or events we've done, particularly our Spinal Cord Injury Forum, like Bathroom Blues, which was a couple of years ago before the pandemic. And in working on those resources and events as part of our info center, I've come to understand that there are ice cream topics and there are broccoli topics. There are topics that people really want to talk about. They really want to share their experiences, topics that really engage or interest us or make us laugh or speak to our biggest needs. And then there are topics that are a little hard to talk about. They're dry or complex and force us into uncomfortable spaces that don't have any easy answers. One of the hardest things about self-advocacy, I find, is that it forces us to face that there are some gaps in our fundamental rights and needs, and all that that implies. It doesn't feel very good to think about that, at least for me. It can be kind of discouraging. In fact, this event is all about sharing information and thinking about self-advocacy and our experience of disability in a way that isn't a big chore on its own, in a way that recognizes what we all have to do and what we all do regularly, and creates an opportunity for us to learn something from each other and share some information, but also have a little refuge from some of those frustrating and sometimes disheartening experiences. So I'm really thankful to have you all here today to talk about self-advocacy, which is one of those broccoli topics, but hopefully in a way that is fun and a little sweet and gives you some reprieve and an opportunity to let off some steam. A candy-coated broccoli topic, if you will. That's why, as a part of this, we've set up some great breakout sessions. You could think of them as palate cleansers. One of the most important self-advocacy skills I've learned in my disability is how, someone said more like liver, and I would tend to agree. So one of the most important skills I've learned in advocacy is how important caring for your mind is in advocating for your body's needs. So join us today and tomorrow for our breakout sessions after the keynote speeches. And the breakout sessions are some mindfulness, some movement, and some music, which spells So it's kind of perfect for our food theme. Thanks for bearing with that terrible joke. You might be wondering why we're thinking about self-advocacy lately. Spinal Cord Injury BC has been looking at updating a very old advocacy handbook that is from, I think, before 2010. And it was originally created by Spinal Cord Injury Canada. And we decided during the pandemic that it might be a good idea to revisit it and see how we could improve it and make it more relevant for the age of TikTok and electronic visits with doctors and that sort of thing. In April, we conducted a survey of our membership and received more than 70 responses, which told us that healthcare and transportation were by far the most common topics on which people felt the need to self-advocate. This Activate Your Advocacy event was put together to help us learn from you what support is needed and learn how best to share that wisdom and those strategies used by our community so that this wisdom is there for those who need it along their own journey. This is why we've asked for your input on our Jamboard system that we're using, that Jenna's put the link in the chat below. And to share what you're learning and what you know, and what you think about the event and the topics we're discussing, so that we can improve our guide going forward. If you're an active listener like I am, you might find that you can share during this, and like put your input into the Jamboard during the speakers and the panel discussion, but you're also welcome to respond afterwards. If Jamboard isn't your jam, feel free to email your comments about this webinar and your experiences around advocacy to info@sci-bc.ca with the subject line advocacy, to share your experiences that way. The input we receive through these comments and Jamboard and through email and the chat will all be a part of informing the advocacy guide going forward. So I want to close with pointing out the obvious. We all know that self-advocacy is one small part of the whole advocacy puzzle. I want you to rest assured that Spinal Cord Injury BC and many of the people on these panels and organizations we work with are working toward advocacy on an organizational and legislative level on issues such as COVID supports, accessible parking, coverage for catheters, and things like that. And just because we aren't specifically discussing the structural issues here today that require group advocacy doesn't mean that they aren't important. I believe that being the best self-advocate you can be, which includes caring for yourself and your own needs, equips us all to be stronger advocates as a group or with organizations. So, and now I would like to introduce our guest speaker for today. It's my pleasure to introduce Tara Moss. Tara is an outspoken advocate for the rights of women, children, and people with disabilities. She has been a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador since 2007, and as of 2013 is UNICEF Australia's National Ambassador for Child Survival, and has visited Australian hospitals, maternity wards, and schools, as well as Syrian refugee camps in Lebanon, in her UNICEF role. She works to dismantle stigmas around mobility aid use through her writing and her Instagram page, Tara and Wolfie. Please join me in welcoming Tara.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you, Spinal Cord Injury BC, for this privilege. And thank you, everyone who's tuning in right now. So I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people. So I'm here on Vancouver Island. And for accessibility, I'm going to do just a quick rundown of what you can visually see right now. So I am a middle-aged woman with dark salt and pepper hair. I have blue eyes, I have big lips and big teeth. I'm wearing a dark dress, and behind me is a vintage gold screen. I'm also wearing a pendant. I'm gonna start out with this keynote, taking us into a bit of a PowerPoint. I know when you hear PowerPoint, you go, oh, dry. This won't be dry, I promise. Some of this material will be second nature to you, especially for those of you who, like myself, have a disability and have been dealing with these issues for years. A lot of this will be, second nature to you and something you know like the back of your hand. For some people who are newer to this area or who are here as allies, as carers or family and friends, I hope that there's some new information for you here. And also in the advocacy space, I hope it gives you some kind of tips and tricks and maybe even just a little bit of encouragement to get into that advocacy space. So I'm just going to share screen here. Here we go. Right, so you deserve to be heard. That's the thing I really want you to come away with after this talk. That's the most important element here. but I'm going to begin by letting you know a little bit about myself. I'm a best-selling author, an award-winning human rights advocate, a mother, a wife, and a disabled woman. I had an injury in 2016 that led to complex regional pain syndrome, and that's in my right leg. As a result of that, I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. Yes, we do exist, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the presentation as well. I use multiple mobility aids and pacing tools to manage functioning from day to day. Complex regional pain syndrome is primarily a pain disorder, but it does have a lot of, I guess you could call it a cluster of symptoms that goes across various parts of the body. Primarily, though, I'm working through pacing for severe chronic pain. So one of the things I do is use my wheelchair for pacing. I use canes, I use walkers, I use, breathing techniques, medications, medical interventions, pretty much everything that's out there, just so that I can try to function as well as possible and live as fully as possible. And trying to access all of that has involved a lot of self-advocacy. Personally, I use the term disabled woman. That's identity first language. So for myself, I use that because I'm putting the identity of the disabled community first. My solidarity with the disability community kind of comes as a part of that. So, I'm a Canadian woman, just like I'm a disabled woman. I'm a writer and I'm disabled. That's for me how I use the terminology. I also use person with disabilities or person with chronic illness. So those are all appropriate for me. And for each person who's out there, they're going to be finding their own language and their own identity. And if you don't know how someone likes to identify, it's always good just to ask. I'm also a spoonie. I hope most of you are familiar with spoon theory. If not, it's a term that was coined by Christine Miserandino, and I do recommend looking it up, but I guess a short form of that would be to say that for a lot of people, their disabilities or chronic illnesses are not static. They change through the day depending on things like fatigue, flare-ups, pain level, like what they're able to do, how much pacing they've got day to day, and it changes constantly. So you kind of wake up each morning with a certain number of spoons, as if you're sitting down at a fancy table. How much silverware have you got for this day? And each time you use a spoon, you can only use it that one day until you top up again. So there's more to spoon theory than that, but in essence, I'm one of those spoonies who has to kind of carefully manage the number of spoons I've got each day. Might find that I use one spoon just getting to my car, or having a bath, or something as simple as that might use up a spoon that day. And that might mean that I have fewer spoons for later and have to make changes in my plans. So I'm a person who deals with that kind of variability. Now, disability is a normal part of being human. I can't focus on this enough for people to understand that disability is not, it's not something that's fringe, it's not something that's new, it's not something that should be put off to the side and not thought about. It is a normal part of being human, and it always has been, whether people are born with disability or chronic illness, or whether they find some event in their lives, bring that into their day-to-day experience. This has always been a part of being human. And I think that the discomfort with disability and chronic illness and aging, which can also be, of course, related to the former two, that discomfort with it has really done a disservice to our community and to society in general. We need to embrace disability as just a normal part of being human beings. And we're certainly not a fringe minority. I hear different stats all the time, but 1 in 5 people identify as being disabled as a kind of a general kind of level that I find in most of the stats. Here, this is the US saying 19% of the US population have at least one disability. And they point out that no diversity group is excluded from disability. And in fact, it's the only minority group you can join. So it's quite a large number of people. And it says here as well, 56 million people have disabilities in the United States. These stats might change a little bit depending on the criteria or the year, but it's a very large number of people. And also, I think this is an important stat to think about, that about 30% of US families have at least one member with a disability. It's nearly a third of families. So of course, there's not just us, the disabled individual. There are our families, our friends, you know. Every time I'm unable to access an area because I'm using my wheelchair and I can't get in, it means my family can't get in. It means my friends I'm with can't get in. And so there's a large segment of the population being impacted by ineffective legislation and by inaccessibility. In Canada, the stats are very similar. This from 2017 puts the number at 22%. So 6.2 million people. Again, I think this is underreporting actually. Quite a number of people would fit into the category of having a disability or chronic illness and might not identify or might not be accessing the care that they need. So they might not be included in these surveys. But any way you look at it, we're a very large segment of the population and really not a fringe minority. And I want us to, harness our collective abilities to advocate because we are such a large group. And I think that's, we have power. We have power, and advocating is part of that power. We deserve to be seen and represented. So I don't know about you, but I have not seen, 1 in 5 characters on screen represented as having a disability. Not all disabilities are visible. Not all disabilities are spoken about openly, but I think it's pretty safe to say that we're really not looking at a pop culture landscape or a mainstream media landscape where the number of people who are represented kind of accurately fit into the number of people in the actual community who are impacted by these issues or who fit into these different groups. So 81% of disabled people feel they're not well represented in the media. And I think it's time for this to change. I think maybe that number is even higher. I'm just going to take a wild guess at that. For myself as well, I'll speak for a moment from the perspective of someone who's an ambulatory wheelchair user. The fact that we're not represented generally on screen, in fact, the representations of people in wheelchairs tends to be very poor in the media and very poor in books. I'm an author by trade. I don't think storytelling has been particularly good in terms of representing wheelchair users. And when they do, it tends to be for all the wrong reasons and really perpetuating a lot of myths. So as an ambulatory wheelchair user, I'm actually impacted by those myths on a day-to-day basis. Representation matters. This is one of the reasons why it matters, is that if we aren't seen, if we aren't visible, if our voices aren't heard, if we're not represented, and by that I mean with some accuracy and authenticity in storytelling, that allows myths to really take over, and that has had a real impact certainly on me and many other people, friends of mine who have disabilities, and probably many of you who are listening right now. This is an interesting moment for me actually in this image. As I mentioned, I'm a writer, I'm a novelist, and I've written 13 books so far and published those around the world. And I acquired my disability, so it wasn't something that I was experiencing through my whole life. It's been the last 5.5 years. And I was on a TV set for a book tour and arrived with my cane that I call Wolfie. And I had Wolfie kind of leaned in the corner because if you use a cane, you probably know they tend to kind of clang on the ground a lot. I'm always dropping canes in the ground and in restaurants that have really loud flooring. Anyway, I'd put it off to the side, and the presenters, just as we were counting down to go live, said, "Oh, we'd love you to show off your cane and talk about that." So I was sort of thrown into quite suddenly wanting to find a way to articulate my experience as a mobility aid user. Now, I ended up finding that experience really rewarding, but it wasn't what I was there for. I was there to talk about a book I'd been working on for years. And I guess that's one of the things that, in terms of self-advocacy, we want to be visible, we want to be out there, we want to be appreciated for the many facets of who we are. So because I use a visible aid doesn't mean that everything I do has to be about that visible aid, but I think that there is power in being represented in mainstream media using mobility aids, and I proudly do that. I really enjoyed that segment and was glad that they took the time to talk about mobility aids and maybe reduce the stigma, which is something I'm passionate about. But again, you just never know when you're putting yourself out there where the media is going to focus. Because my condition is primarily a pain condition, it's actually not about something you can see. Whether I'm using my wheelchair, lying in bed, or using my cane, it's the same condition. And it's primarily the things you don't see, which are the things that are difficult for me on a day-to-day basis. My aids are, they're aids to my day. They're my freedom machines. And I'm using my wheelchair right now, actually, one of my wheelchairs, and that's just below the cutoff of the screen. So no two people are the same. And, I think a lot of the people tuning in right now have different experiences of disability, or they're here to support, or because they know someone who has a disability and they want to know more about how to support that person. I will say that none of us is the same. No one, whether they're disabled or not, should be expected to have the same needs, the same experiences, the same interests or appearance. And not all disabilities are visible, and certainly not all are static. Many of us have what I call dynamic disabilities, what's often called dynamic disabilities. And that means you might see me walk to my car, get in, drive somewhere, get out, and then pull my wheelchair out of the back of the car and use it. These are things I need. I need that wheelchair to function, but that kind of use of a wheelchair as an ambulatory wheelchair user is not very often represented in popular culture. In fact, there's a lot of narratives around faking disability and memes about that, and that leads to disability myths. And disability myths, unfortunately, and this lack of representation I've been talking about, they lead to abuse. So I don't know whether you've had these experiences yourself. I can only speak from my personal experience of disability so far, but I'm often told that I don't look the part. When I was primarily using a walking stick, I was always told, aren't you too young for that? Or, what did you do to yourself? And there was an assumption that I just had injured myself, or that it was a prop. We see in this snapshot, someone says, I get the feeling the stick is an affectation. So there's this idea that only certain types of people use mobility aids and they only look a certain way. I've certainly had the experience of, having my disability placard up in my car and going to use a parking spot. And I don't know why people are so obsessed with disabled parking spots, but I went to drive in and there's someone just screaming at me, yelling, disability parking spot. And I was like, I know, that's why I have the, thing showing, the visor showing, and why I'm using that is because I need that spot. But yeah, again, from the shoulders up, I might not look like what someone expects. And for some reason, there's a real public obsession, I would say, with what I call disability policing. So people who are not doctors, who are not physiotherapists, who are not your health caregivers, who think they know something about you and want to tell you what's what, and may abuse you for using the things that you need, whether they're mobility aids or parking spots. As I mentioned before, ambulatory wheelchair users exist. In fact, this is one of the hashtags I use a lot online. I am one. There are many of us. Annie Segara is another one. She's a wonderful advocate. And as she points out, there's a quote here. Many people believe that wheelchair equates with you cannot move, and anything outside of that gets accused as faking. And that is an antagonization that I experience, she says, and it escalates to violence as well. There's a friend of mine who has EDS and she uses a power wheelchair, and she was all dressed up, for example, at this event. It was a black tie event. I think it was a charity event that she was being honored at even, and she's in her wheelchair at the table. And someone came up after all the speeches, after everything had been done, and said to her, "I've been watching you. I saw your foot move under the table." Like, just it boggles the mind that someone feels that trying to catch someone out who's disabled is a thing to do, and that they understand all experiences of disability, or that they feel all wheelchair users are completely unable to move parts of their body. I mean, there's so much variety in terms of disability and wheelchair use, and that just doesn't seem to have sunk in for a lot of people. And unfortunately, because of that kind of narrative of fakery, there's, it brings a great deal of criticism and analysis from strangers onto people when they're using the aids that they need to get through life. Disability comes in many forms, and we're not all the same, as I've said. So here's an example from a magazine where I'm with my daughter there, sitting down and using my cane, and sitting in my wheelchair in the other shot. And the headline says, "There's no magic solution to chronic pain, but there is hope." So I'm hopeful that some of the chronic pain research that's happening at the moment will eventually help people with chronic pain conditions like mine, or people that come after us, because chronic pain conditions really do impact millions of people, and everyone's experience is different, but certainly the people I know as well who have CRPS or similar conditions, we're always hoping to find something that can reduce the pain so we can function just that little bit more. Again, it's not about the mobility aids. Those are wonderful tools and freedom machines for me, but it's about that functioning day to day. Accessibility and inclusion are human rights, not special privileges. I imagine everyone who's here tonight knows that, but it is often the case that it is implied that these are special privileges that people with disabilities or chronic illness are asking for. So for example, if it's as simple as the parking spot, that's closer to the building. If it's not having stairs going into legislature so that we can get in there and actually participate in democracy. These aren't special privileges. This is about access and inclusion, and we all have the right to be able to participate fully in life. Unfortunately, in Canada and many other countries, we don't have that level of accessibility and inclusion that we need to have, that it's not where it should be at. And that's one of the reasons why advocacy is so incredibly important. One of my friends was the late Stella Young. I'm so fortunate that I got to know her. I actually knew her through a lot of advocacy work before I myself became disabled. But she was just an absolute champion in the advocacy space. And it would be about every type of issue that she should not have to have dealt with. Going into the local pub and finding that the disabled washroom was filled with storage instead of open to be used for its purpose. You know, it was this sort of thing that she was constantly bringing to the public's attention. She was a tireless advocate. And here is her quote I've got on the slide that says, "Apologies are great, but they don't really change anything. You know what does? Action. Action changes things." And that's I think what we want to do with advocacy, is to point out that we actually need some things to change. This is another reason why I'm very public in my advocacy, is because I encounter issues with accessibility and challenges on a day-to-day basis, and I'm not alone in that. I know literally all of us do. And when it does go into the media or ends up, being discussed in legislation and government, very often the disabled voices are taken out of that conversation. It's written about by someone who's not experiencing it themselves. And it just means we have to work that much harder to have our perspectives and voices and needs heard. And that's something that I think is really important to push for, to advocate for change if you're able to. So here I give an example of a recent tweet of mine. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the forms of advocacy that might be possible for some of us. And again, we have to choose what's right for us and what boundaries are suitable for our own comfort and safety, and also, using our skill set. For me, particularly as a public figure, as an author, I'm trying to use that public stage to focus on issues that are related to disability and chronic illness. And here's an example of a fun recent tweet. "Dear journalists and photo editors, thanks for writing about disability issues and wheelchair users. One point, please listen to the disability community when we request that you drop the term wheelchair bound. It's inaccurate and negative." And then I've got in brackets, "Look, no ropes or chains. Thank you." So this might not be an issue that you particularly feel strongly about, but I know many of us do. And seeing again these headlines where they've done a great interview with a disability advocate, that person's a wheelchair user, they don't refer to themselves as confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound, but the media is referring to them that way, often in the headline or the photo caption. And that's inaccurate, and it's a negative framing of mobility aids that already have a huge amount of stigma around them, unnecessary stigma. So if you are able to be vocal about the issues you care about, it might be something completely different. And in fact, caring about something like this issue of language is probably not surprising for a writer. Doesn't mean I don't care about other issues and speak out on those. But joining that chorus of voices of the people with disabilities who are speaking out can be incredibly powerful. And I recommend that if you're able to do so, if you feel comfortable doing so, that it's something you consider doing if you're not already. I personally believe that social media is one really positive way to go around traditional media, around those traditional gatekeepers, and reach people directly. For myself, it seems surprising now, perhaps, but when I was 20, I was in my 20s, and I had my second bestseller come out as a novel, and I remember this rumor campaign saying that because I was young and blonde at the time and had done some modeling to pay my rent, that I couldn't have possibly written my own book. Now, that's ridiculous stereotyping, but nonetheless, there it was. And so I was dared to take a polygraph test, that's right, a lie detector test, to prove that I write my own books. That's a whole other universe to right now for me, but I took that opportunity. It was before the days of social media, and it was before I had the mic like I do right now. That's a privilege. So the opportunity I had was to say, sure, I'll take that polygraph test. And I ended up with a 33-page report telling me, guilty as charged, I'm an author. as ridiculous as that was, it was a way of shifting the narrative. Now we have social media as one of these opportunities for us to shift the narrative, to actually be able to speak directly as ourselves, whether it's through blogs, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, whatever area you're using, you get to be the publisher and publish your own words directly. And I think that's incredibly powerful for the disability community. Otherwise, we've been kept out of a lot of the conversations. So in terms of advocating for change publicly, if you can, be visible and vocal in your community. And again, you have to judge for you whether that's going to be the right thing, whether that's going to work for you or be comfortable for you. I cannot stress enough how much I recommend reaching out and connecting with the disability community. I mean, you're doing that right now by being here. You're doing that by being in touch with Spinal Cord Injury BC. But look for disabled peers, look for people who are speaking out online, follow them, amplify their words, and engage with that community, because it can be incredibly powerful and supportive. If you're comfortable and can safely do so, consider sharing your experiences, because those voices are really underrepresented. And absolutely contact local council and government about issues that impact you and people in your family and your networks, about accessibility and other legislation that impacts you. This is important stuff. Or as I've said here also, even better, consider entering government. That's maybe not right for me, but it might be for you. And we need you. We need to have more people with disabilities who are at the table making decisions and being heard. So a few more really quick online advocacy tips here. Create personal boundaries. Decide for yourself things like, when will I engage with the online sphere? I, for example, recommend only doing that in public spaces of your home where you would have friends come in. So I try not to use the Twitter, say, in the bathroom or in bed or in other private spaces. I don't always stick to my own rules, but I try to do that because once you're putting things out there, it is a very big public space that you're entering into. So try to create a boundary around that, just for your own mental health and safety. Create personal boundaries around what you feel comfortable sharing about yourself. Are you in a position where you can share your experience as a person with disability and chronic illness? If you're not, you don't have to do that. There's no requirement. If you do feel comfortable, think about, how would I feel with, say, my employer seeing this, or my family? Work through all those questions in your mind so that you feel empowered when you're speaking out. I recommend doing simple things like combining messages with images. If you can have short messages, they're fantastic in places like Twitter. I always use alt descriptions, so you can see the little ALT there in the bottom of the image that I've posted with my daughter. And that's just a basic image description. I also use image descriptions on Instagram and so on. And again, connect with the community. They're such an amazing resource, and I have learned so much over the last 5 years, and I know I have a lot still to learn and to grow with. So again, follow and amplify disabled advocates and disabled creators and thinkers. There's so many amazing people out there to follow and use those hashtags. Some of the hashtags I use, I mentioned one before that's quite long, which is ambulatory wheelchair users exist. That's a very long one, but Annie Segara uses it as well, and I do. It might not be relevant to your personal experience, so you might want to use things that are a little bit more simple, like just disability Twitter. That's a great one for connecting with community. And of course, keywords like accessibility, disability, visibility for disability. That's again great for issues of representation. And nothing about us without us. Really important to spearhead that conversation about how when disabled characters are written, they're often written by people who are not themselves disabled, and those are the representations that end up in the mainstream. So nothing without us, nothing about us without us, I think is a really important concept. The best advocacy is done together, and I hope that you will connect with me online if you're not already, and we can amplify each other. And advocating for yourself is also an important topic here with Spinal Cord Injury BC, and I'm really pleased to see that. It's been a big part of my world for the last 5 years, advocating particularly in the healthcare arena, because I have to have a lot of medical appointments and hospital visits, as many of you may also experience. And when you're chronically ill or disabled, that does come with extra challenges. For me, with a pain condition, I often need to have medication for that pain, and that has a cognitive effect and can make it really directly difficult to continue to articulate myself and advocate in the standard ways. So that might be something you experience as well. And it means that essentially you need to plan so much harder than the average person might need to. And it can be done. Prepare before your medical appointments. Probably a lot of you are already well across this, but if you're not, I really do recommend trying to do that. Also ask for recommendations from community and people you trust. Not every doctor or clinic is the same. I've had extremely varied experiences in the medical sphere and healthcare community, extremely varied, some very negative experiences and some positive. And if we are able to share our stories and talk amongst each other, I feel that we're maybe more likely to get the support that we need. I always write down questions before I go to a medical appointment. In fact, one tip I can tell you right now, one of the reasons I'm using PowerPoint right now is because if I have a pain flare while I'm doing the talk, I've still got the information in front of me, the messages that I want to convey to you. And so I'm giving myself that support. I'm giving myself that safety net. I do that in medical appointments as well. I make sure that I've written everything down, because some of those appointments, of course, have wait lists for months. I don't want to miss those opportunities, so I write everything down and plan ahead. Think about bringing a support person. Many medical appointments will allow you to do that. Sometimes under COVID that can be difficult, but you can fight for that and possibly have a support person, I hope, when it's needed for you. Of course, be assertive. And I think being assertive is just knowing that you deserve to be heard and you deserve care. And if you know that, and you don't allow someone else's dismissal of you to override that knowledge in yourself, I think that helps a great deal. Go in reminding yourself, I deserve to be heard. I deserve to be here getting care, and hold on to that. And that's why when you're having a tough day, you're having one of those pain flares, for example, or just having a difficult time, you're underslept, or any of those things that hit the best of us so often in the community, you might have a support person there with you, pushing for those things that you're maybe not able to push for yourself in that moment. So I think really within healthcare sphere, advocating for yourself is just incredibly important. And I'm just going to mention quickly self-care. I apologize that the word self-care is a little bit faint, so hopefully everyone can read that okay. Looking after yourself is so important because your mental, physical, and emotional well-being is of value and is worthy and needs to be taken care of. And when you are able to look after those areas and receive the care and support you need in those areas, and it also allows you to accomplish more, help others better, and avoid burnout, whatever that means for you. So for me, sometimes accomplishing more means I got the bath done. You know, I actually washed my hair this week. You know, I'm not necessarily talking about, hey, I finished another novel. Um, I take days as they come, and they are really varied for me. And accomplishments can be very small or very big. But when I look after my self-care and I fight for that support that I need successfully, when I'm able to do that, it's just so much better for myself and my family and everyone around me. And it's been a long time since any of us has been on a plane, I imagine. But this is an image you would have seen of the oxygen mask on a plane, and it says, place the oxygen mask on yourself before helping small children or others who may need your assistance. And the reason that they say that is that if you can't breathe, if you can't get your oxygen, you can't help anyone else. So self-care is not an indulgence. It's not a special ask. It is survival. It is essential, and it's something that you deserve. So just to close off this part, I'll reiterate that you should believe and know that you have the right to be there and the right to be heard. It's incredibly important when self-advocating in whatever sphere that you are. And finally, here's just a few ways that you can reach me if you do want to connect. And I love to follow back and hear people's stories and amplify those stories in every way I can. And again, some of the hashtags I use is one I didn't mention before, which is normalize mobility aids. That's one of my primary focuses, certainly at Tara and Wolfie, and also normalizing chronic illness and chronic pain, because they're also quite misunderstood. I hope some of this is connected with you, been helpful, or at least kind of reiterated things that maybe you needed to hear right now. And I really look forward to hearing some of your own stories and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. We really appreciate it. And I invite anyone from the audience to use their little reactions button to show your love and appreciation for Tara's talk and what she's shared with us today. I know I learned some and certainly resonated with it. I think oftentimes, even if you feel like you know what you need to know and you've got all the information in you, it's always so great to hear someone say it aloud and validate that it's real, that your needs are not fake and they're valid. So thank you so much from me. That was a real take home. So I really appreciate your talk, and we have some great questions already. So anyone in the chat, if you have a question directly for Tara before she goes, I think we have 10 minutes or so left. So actually, no, I think we've got a bit more than that. So maybe 20. Put your questions in the chat. And if you already put them in the chat, I think we already have them in our list. So excellent. And Terry's saying, please use the chat feature, or you can raise your hand. Under participants. I think you can also do it under your reactions icon on the bottom of the Zoom app if you want to ask a live question. But in the meantime, I'll start with the questions that have previously been asked. Tara, Vince, who is, I have to say, probably one of our captains of advocacy here in BC, had a really interesting question or sort of feedback early on in your talk. And he said, are we underrepresented as people with disabilities because we don't come together as one unified group on important issues? And I was curious what you had to say about that.
That's a great question. I personally think that the disability community has been doing amazing work with a great deal of obstacles in their way. That's my personal view. Yes, we could come together better because we need to, but I think it's actually been very difficult to be heard. I think that issues of disability are issues that a lot of non-disabled people don't want to hear about. And issues of accessibility and disability are not considered, sexy selling points and, things like that. So I think there are specific obstacles that have been placed in our way that are not to be blamed on a lack of organizational skills, for example. Um, Through COVID, through the pandemic, we have seen, how powerful it is to get the disability community online and speaking together. And I think that there's, a lot of possibilities there to try to keep that going once things, open up. I'm not going to say post-COVID world because we don't know if that even is going to exist, but I think that coming together is really possible, particularly in the digital sphere, because for many of us, including myself, travel is not very easy. Getting from one place to another is not very easy. And in fact, a lot of the buildings where people are making decisions are specifically inaccessible. I mean, it's that speaks volumes. So there are ways we can overcome that. I'd like to see all that change also, but right now, one of the things we can do is come together in these digital spaces safely and in ways where we have our supports, and to make sure we're heard, because the rest of the world is also online. And we can kind of wrestle those narratives over to where we want them to be, and so that we're heard. So I think in any movement, there's always going to be ways that you can improve unity and effectiveness. But I think actually there's been real issues with ableism and dismissal of these issues that have caused things up till this point to be quite genuinely tricky. I'd like to see those things change in a big way.
Absolutely. That's a really good insight. I wanted to ask our audience to interact in a way based on something you said near the end of your talk. Anyone in the audience who is on a civic committee or is offering input to their local government in any way related to your disability, can you either use your reactions or type in the chat? Because I bet that there's an awful lot of us. And I anyone who hasn't been involved in that, look around and see how many people are sort of actively engaged in that sphere, and that's an interesting foothold if you not specific to healthcare, but sometimes, and often the closest and most proximate way that you can use your voice to share your needs. We have a bunch of hands up, and so I'm gonna start going through them. Alec is first. However, Alec has asked a question earlier, so I'm just gonna answer that one quickly because I think people can help us answer it. So if you entered late and you don't know about Spinal Cord Injury BC, we're a provincial nonprofit organization that supports, offers peer support and information resources for people living with spinal cord injury, their friends and family, and people with similar disabilities. And we have a lot of great resources and ways to connect with other people with similar experiences on our website, which is www.sci-bc.ca. And we also have lots of online peer support groups and in-person peer support activities, which are all on our website on the events tab. But I think Alec's not in Canada. So if anyone is from Australia and knows of a great peer support way to connect, could you put it in the chat for us? It'd be really great to get a list of ones that are tried and true. I know there's some great organizations in the spinal cord injury sphere in Australia, but I don't know about other conditions. So Alec, I'm going to ask you to unmute and share your question with us.
So I wrote it down just so I don't forget. So I am kind of newly disabled. I don't know like a lot of resources. I just got my diagnosis when I was 17. How do you get access to customized wheelchairs or access to customized motorized wheelchairs? Like, how do you access that? Because the one that I do have doesn't really work very well, and it was very expensive.
Oh gosh, it makes me so mad that this is such a common issue. Like, thank you for sharing that. I'm hoping that Jocelyn will have some resources she can offer too, but I'll just say straight up that I've had to pay a lot of money out of pocket for my mobility aids over the last several years. And as my condition has turned out to be progressive, that's been, hard because I have to keep getting, there's a bath lift, and then there's a different type of chair, and then there's power assist, and mostly insurance does not cover, doesn't cover much of it at all. So going through personal savings at this stage, and I see so many GoFundMe accounts for people to get wheelchairs and the things they require, and I personally feel that just we should never have people in that position where they don't get the mobility aids that they need. That's just or for that matter, the healthcare that they need. So I wish that I had a great answer for that. And I'm hoping Jocelyn or someone else here can give some really good advice on how to get access to the mobility aids that you need. Because again, mine had to be specialized. I need specialized seating because I've got nerve injuries, and like I can't just sit on a transit chair or something like that.
My friends were amazing, and they all chipped in to help me get this motorized wheelchair, but I have cysts in my spine and my brainstem that makes everything so much harder and more pain. And I was hoping that there would be like a more like resources based on how to help that. But
Yeah.
it's not. Thank you though.
Yeah, occupational therapists are usually something. I mean, I live in BC, and the Island Health here in Vancouver Island came to my house and were able to assist with giving me like for free on the public purse, giving me ideas of what I should get. They couldn't pay for it, but they could give me the assessment. And I thought getting a really good occupational therapist is one great step forward, and in many places doesn't involve personal funds being paid out. What often happens that they were telling me about was that if someone has some coverage, it will usually not cover exactly what they need though, and it'll be a percentage of it. And yeah, I'd love to see that change. Jocelyn, do you know of some resources? Maybe you can pop that in. I would love to know about that too, because my needs are changing year to year, and what I, learn or is assessed for one year will unfortunately not be the same the next.
Absolutely. It's if I wish I could wave a magic wand, because nobody should need, adaptive equipment that they can't get otherwise. The tip around an occupational therapist is really important. I know in a lot of places in the US, you can't get one without an insurer. And so I would first, make sure you're on Medicare or Medicaid, and work within that system to the degree you can. Your primary care provider is probably your first ally. And if they're not an ally, maybe find another one. I'm not as up on the US, so what I suggest to everyone is if you're outside BC, we may not be able to get you an immediate answer, but give our info line a call, an email at info@sci-bc.ca, and I put the email address in the chat, and the phone number is on our website. I'm always terrified to get it wrong, so maybe Heather can put it in the chat. The 1-800-689-2477. Oh, it just came out of my head. In the US, there's also, I'm a big fan of, if you're really in need immediately, look around the local disability organizations in your area for a buy and sell, and look for equipment similar that is available at a very reduced cost. We know from our buy and sell that it's sometimes very hard to move good condition used wheelchairs because they lack a battery, and the battery is like $600 or $800, but for that cost you get a whole new power chair, and then you might be able to get a vendor to help you customize it, or a charity, for example. And I know the third place in the US is your state independent living center, which often can assist with things that you might require for work. And it's sad that our functionality is only connected to how productive we can be, but it is one way to do it. And there's a similar fund in BC called Work BC Assistive Technology Services that Roger just put in the chat. And there's people putting some great suggestions in the chat that are for various locations. Alec, I would definitely encourage you to give our info line a call. We might be able to do some research for you to see what we can find out. We got lots of calls from the US, and it's always good for us to know that stuff. So thank you so much. We have several more questions, so I'm going to move on to Christy. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and just to keep your question to 2 minutes or less, please.
I was just curious and offering out there as a suggestion or something. What about parents in wheelchairs and raising children from the wheelchairs? Because I've experienced this 4 years coming November, going directly home to 2 kids. And it's been very hard, and I get support. I get told this is a parent in a wheelchair. But at the end of the day, when I can't show up for my children, it's the worst feeling in the world. And I don't know how to coordinate my family to understand. I have no support. I've been trying and looking. I've been through family development programs, and nobody gets it. So I'm having troubles making my children understand what's going on in their own home. I'm being projected as, I call it a walker. That's not the deal here. Sometimes, then I'm done there, because I guess the rest rolls right out. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Christy. That's such a hard one. And I know Tara's a mom, so I throw to you first.
Yeah, look, I'm a parent myself, and my daughter has experienced, gone through this experience with me for 5.5 years, and she's 10, so it's now more than half of her life. I'm really grateful to say that she has become an incredibly empathic and understanding girl through this, and she understands it better now that I understand it better as well. It was a blessing for me in a way when I got my diagnosis, although it was a diagnosis no one wants to get. CRPS is quite a severe condition, but just having a diagnosis helped me to be able to explain things better to people. So I really feel for everyone who's tuning in right now, who maybe is in that zone right now where they're not able to be understood. In part, that can be because they don't have a diagnosis. They have a whole bunch of symptoms, but they don't have a diagnosis. I think I would like to see you getting some support in your community. I think a lot ends up falling on families, and we can only talk with them about what we're going through, and they all have their own stuff they're going through, and it can be really hard. I know I've at least been able to, on my own journey, kind of drop the guilt. I felt a lot of mother guilt early on, because there were a lot of things I was unable to do, which I had previously done with my daughter, because my mobility had changed, or even just because of my pain. I hated bringing her into emergency rooms when I would get hit with a pain flare, and I just didn't want her to be in that environment. And I've actually just don't feel any guilt about that now. It's not like there was some magic wand that came along, but it's something I just had to process and accept, that this doesn't make me a bad mom. It just means that I've got this thing that I'm dealing with, and that's part of life. So I don't know how helpful that is. I really think it would be important to be getting support. I get some support from the pain program at Royal Jubilee. They have a great pain program. It's mostly been done through cyber sessions, but even that I've found really helpful, and just kind of giving me tools to articulate what's happening for my family and also figure out what I need to get through. But yeah, hopefully someone else has some concrete thing that can help you to get support on the ground, because it can be a lot of fatigue that you're experiencing at the end of the day, coming back and having to look after 2 kids. It can be really, really challenging. So
Thanks for that.
Yeah, hopefully, Jocelyn, you've got some tips.
I would also suggest, Christy, you're definitely not alone, and there are lots of parents among our peer program and peer mentors. And I know in the past, Terry's tried to set up a mom's group. And so that might be something we can look at going forward, just to connect you with one other person, if not even a regular group. I know we have several moms in the chat, and Nicole is one of them, and she has a regular group. And she mentioned that there's a childcare subsidy in Canada for help with childcare. I know of a few peers who've received a little bit of CECL funding because they're a parent specifically, so they can't, like independent living caregiving funding, to allow them time to do their routines, so they have someone who can, help them, or they can pay someone who can help with childcare as well. So normally CECL doesn't cover childcare, obviously, but so there are options. It's all in how your advocates fight for you, your OTs and your local nursing folks. So Kim has the next question. So Kirsty, I'm sorry, I have to move on, but let's keep in touch, because I think you've hit on a really important need. So thanks for your question. Kim, I'm gonna ask, oh, you're already unmuted. There you go.
I thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. I unmuted myself because I wasn't sure once I get started if I can stop, but just give me the 2-minute sign, Jocelyn.
Yeah, you have 2 minutes.
I know. I want to say thank you so much for the presentation and the tips, and it made me really think about how many people either have disabilities, know someone who has a disability, or will have a disability eventually in their life, but don't yet know it. That's all of us. And, within the last decade or so, we've made so much momentum in society when we talk about access and inclusion, and that's inclusion of all people, the LGBTQ plus group, First Nations, you name it, race, religion, all kinds of things. But what about us? I mean, seriously, like when you think that it is all of us in one way or another, as I just explained, like why are we still going through the back door in the kitchens? And I'm talking about brand new buildings. So what is it that we can do together? And why are we so quiet? I'm just throwing that one out there. But with that said, I am doing what I can with our group by getting involved with politicians, et cetera, et cetera. But why do we all know it's hard work. Why are we still doing this in 2021?
Wait, just to clarify, Kim, what is this you mean? Why are we still doing this?
Everybody trying to create equality and inclusion. I mean, why, when there's a brand new building, why do we still have trouble getting in it? I mean, it's like I'm just shocked. Like nobody else would put up with this. Like no other demographic group would put up with being this excluded in events and activities.
Yeah, like I don't think it's a matter of putting up with it. I think that in some cases you're talking about the group, and I guess I touched on this before, to do with self-advocacy. Sometimes you're in the worst possible position to advocate for yourself precisely because of what you're experiencing, if it's a chronic illness, pain condition, or severe disability. Your needs are as important as everybody else's and should be heard as loudly, but that just has not happened. In terms of other social justice movements, I think there's been a huge amount of ground that's been gained, but it's not like they've arrived at equality either. But what's interesting about disability is, of course, it also cuts through all of those groups. Like, I mean, even when we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, which is so important, one of the topics there that was really erased, and many Black disabled advocates talked about this, is that like 50% or more of the Black people being killed in the U.S. by police were disabled. That's the big, you know, the big part of it that kind of gets erased. And I guess it just again goes to show us that there's a discomfort among non-disabled people with disability, with chronic illness, and I would argue also age. There's this kind of way that all comes together to make people just not want to talk about it and engage with it. And as someone as well who's been quite involved in like the women's rights and human rights for the last 20 years, again, disability comes into play with all of that all of the time. But it's not unusual to be invited to speak to an event that's about diversity and inclusion, and like it's not accessible. So these are real issues that we're coming up against all the time. I do think that we can improve things massively. Like we're doing it right now. Like, look at us. Like we've got a lot of talent to bring to the table to make some changes. But there have been obstacles of lots of different varieties, some of them literally physical obstacles getting in the way of us being able to be heard. And so yeah, I would say most people they're not standing for it. They're just, actually that's a terrible term. I can't stand for it, you know, but they're not necessarily letting it slide. It's just those obstacles have been pretty immense. I mean, I find it embarrassing and incredible that, you know, a lot of this, you know, the ADA came in, 30 years ago, and a lot of it hasn't been implemented. You know, in BC, we've got issues. When you talk about new buildings, I went to a medical appointment not so long ago, a few weeks ago, where I like arrived with my car. I have 3 different types of mobility aids in my car, I know, because the world is so inaccessible. I don't actually get to just choose the one that causes me the least pain. So I arrive, I want to get in my wheelchair. I look and I go, oh, look, there's steps leading up to the door. And there's one of those wonderful panels that you press that has the wheelchair symbol on it for the door to open. And I'm like, okay, that's odd design. It's a brand new building. You've got the thing to help open the door, but there's steps going up to it. So I was like, okay, I had to bring the wheelchair back, put it away, get my cane out. I came up, went up the few steps, pressed the thing opened. I thought, well, that's helpful. Walk on the other side, it was a full staircase. There's no lift available at all. So you've got this really odd mix where you've got, you know, an acknowledgement that disabled people exist. You've got the wheelchair symbol there. You've got something to help with the door, but you've got steps on both sides of it. That just seems to me to kind of sum up the halfway accessible, the halfway inclusion that a lot of us are currently living with, you know, living within. And it's just like trying to push past that is, you know, what so many of us are spending our energy on at the moment.
Definitely. Thank you for such a thoughtful answer too, because those are some of the broccoli ones in my mind. They're not easy to answer, and they're questions that kind of hang over us. Yeah. I have the unenviable task of wrapping this up so that we can open our breakout rooms. So I just want to give another thanks to Tara for her great talk and for all of those thoughtful answers.